Well, I learned so much from Matt's trainings. Yeah, the realization that your 7-year-old or 9-year-old or 13, 14, 15-year-old's behavior is not a result of your bad parenting style is overwhelmingly relieving and comforting. And so that knowledge, it really was life-changing for me. And there's a lot of science that backs all this up. This is what we know today about the brain, and learning that my son's early trauma, and his trauma was in hospitals and medical settings for years and years, starting from 6 months of age through about 12 years of age. That trauma played a role in laying down kind of patterns in his mind and in his brain that then later on just really shaped the way that he responded to stress in certain situations. Stress, whether he was hungry or tired or frustrated or intimidated or whatever. I learned from that how the brain would respond to those later points of stress all throughout his development that had nothing to do with our family's our family style or mine and my husband's parenting style. It had to do with his early traumatic experiences.
Inside our limbic system, we have a feature called the hypothalamus. That hypothalamus is our thermostat for our brain. It's trying to make sure the brain keeps the right amount of stress. Homeostasis, right amount in there. But for some kids, like this kid in that treatment center, that stress was just really high. And so just like an air conditioning unit in Phoenix, Arizona, trying to keep the right temperature for the resident, sometimes it breaks down, right? Well, our hypothalamus, when there's too much stress, sometimes breaks down. The next figure in our brain is called the hippocampus. The hippocampus, really want you all to hear this. It's the storage unit for our unconscious memories. Our unconscious memories. So experiences that we did endure, but we don't necessarily recall. So not many of us remember the first step we took in this world, but we did. Not many of us remember the first time we were picked up and we were held, but we were. Not many of us remember the first few years of our lives, but we had them. And for many of us, we have those unconscious memories that are full of love, support, nourishment, of consistently getting our basic needs met. But for some, we have memories of survival. We have memories of stress. Okay? And so if our memories are full of patterned, consistent, repetition, need-making memories, it serve as coping skills. But for others, and it's just survival memories in there, they serve as more stress. Okay? Smack dab in the middle of our brains, in the middle of our limbic system, is called an almond-shaped figure. It's called the amygdala. That amygdala is our fight, flight, or freeze button of our brain. It's our stress response. Any of y'all seen the movie Waterboy? The medulla oblongata, right? That's the amygdala, right? When our amygdala is activated, meaning the stress gets way up, our heart rate gets going, works itself through the midbrain, and for this kid, that amygdala was activated, two kind of responses occur: a hyperarousal response or a hypoarousal response. A hyperarousal response is when our brain is preparing our body to fight. All right? So what occurs is our brain is dumping large doses of cortisol, a fancy word for adrenaline, through our veins. Dumping adrenaline through our veins. Our heart rate goes way up, our blood pressure goes way up, our body temperature goes way up. Our brain is preparing the body to fight. What happens with these episodes is all access to our cortex, to our logic, to our thinking, to our skills is seized. Don't have access to it. And so what you see is a lot of hitting, kicking, yelling, screaming, fighting. And then afterwards, you hear a lot of responses from kids when you're trying to process with them. No remorse. I don't know. Don't know what happened. Care. And for caregivers, what we want most of is a heartfelt, I'm sorry. Want some form of remorse. Right? But a lot of these kids come out of these behaviors with little to no remorse. Right? It could be that they just don't have any. It also could be that they can't be remorseful for something they don't necessarily recall. All right? You hear kids talk about being blacked out, or going into blackout mode. Well, they're not lying to you. In a hyperarousal response, that brain is preparing the body to fight. And so it wants no access towards thinking, and it wants all emotion to fight. Which kind of makes sense to me. I mean, if you're going to go into a fight, you don't want to be overthinking stuff, right? Right? No, you're going in there to fight. And so the brain actually is preparing the body to do just that, and it shuts off all access to our thinking. Another kind of response is a hypoarousal response, and that's our most primitive survival skill we have as human beings. It's when the brain is preparing the body to shut down. And so what happens is our brain actually is dumping a natural dose of an opiate through our veins to slow everything down. And so what we see in our systems is we see our heart rate go way down, we see our body temperature go way down, our blood pressure go way down, and this is almost, it looks like a form of shock. Behaviorally, what you'll see is you'll see kids roll up under the desk in a fetal position. You'll see kids try to hide in their rooms or create forts to hide. You'll see kids that will just sit and just stare at you, and you're trying to talk to them, and you can almost see your words go right through their head. Like, whoa, there it is. You'll also see kids act like animals, or they will be so into their imagination, and you know their imagination is not real, but to them, and trying to get them to understand it's not real, good luck.
We got a lot of advice and a lot of instruction and a lot of opinion from a lot of people. I'm sure I'm not alone in that as a parent of a child with some special challenges. Some things in particular that I can remember are in some of the school settings that we were in, where we would hear things like, he just needs more structure at home, or he just needs you to not baby him so much, or you've got to instill consequences. He has to understand there are consequences for his behavior. Sometimes their feedback, their suggestions felt judgmental. It made me feel bad. It made me feel like everyone around me thought I was a bad parent. And that was salt in the wound on top of already being fearful and confused and concerned and sad about what we were seeing play out in his behavior.
What I will tell you is if your normed responses are working for a kid, keep doing them. If they're not working, if you got a kid where the normed responses aren't working for. So with Jeremy, he'd hide underneath the desk, and my normed response is, get out from under there. Hey, come on, let's go. But as I would do that, he would retreat even more and more. And then I would get him out. I'd move my desk. I'd have somebody else come move in. Got you, dude. And he'd start acting like an animal and work towards another safety zone. And so I had to find a way to respond differently. But before I responded differently, I had to interpret it differently.
One of the biggest things for me was the realization and the learning that there were things going on in his brain, that there was science that could prove that his behavior wasn't my fault. I wasn't a bad mom, I wasn't a bad parent, and my husband wasn't a bad parent. And he didn't necessarily need more rewards and consequences and discipline, like so many people had told us. Well-meaning people, our friends, our family, professionals, people in schools. I learned that instinctively I was right on some level. But I tell you, I knew in my heart, and so did my husband, we knew that the consequences were not always what he needed. Maybe at times, yeah, for little things or certain behaviors, but overall and generally speaking, he had a lot of behavior, a lot of outbursts, a lot of banging and pounding and screaming and meltdowns and doing things in school that kids are not supposed to do. And when I look back on it, and I heard things like he has to sit in his seat for a full 45 minutes for each period because everyone else is expected to do that. That was not realistic for him. And Matt Pierce talks a lot in his trainings about, and there's a tagline that he uses, he would if he could, but he can't, so he won't. And he was not capable in certain settings of following normal rules, normal structure, and normal behavior for typically developed children.
What I will say is emotion coming out is better than staying in. All right, it's better. Now, I believe you can get emotion coming out in predictable, patterned ways instead of their normed, familiar ways. So in other words, that adrenaline release for these kids, their brain is set on they need that. They have to, so for Jeremy, for example, Jeremy was so familiar with activating his stress response that I couldn't talk him out of doing that. I couldn't, but I knew he needed that adrenaline release. So I bought him a skateboard, and me and him would go skateboard riding down a hill. And as we did a skateboard riding down a hill, and I know that might be scary, it was a few years ago, but I'd still probably do it today. But as it was less scary than how he was getting out his emotion. Does that make sense? And at the end of that skateboard ride, just like at the end of these behaviors kids have, we come out of them being exhausted and being tired and being like, whoa, what hit me? And the kid comes back out looking better than ever. Why? Because he got it out of his system. Does that make sense? He got it out of his system. And so I would be thinking about, and I'm not saying buy skateboards and ride them down hills. What I'm saying, though, is find ways to release adrenaline of these kids. Or if it's hypoarousal, meaning they're hiding all the time, find ways to create moments that will allow them to get that release besides through their behavior.
And I also learned that when he is in the midst of some bad behavior, that those moments were not a teaching moment for him. We just knew, I guess from experience, but we never really said it out loud. We just kind of ignored, out-of-town guests or professionals that would come in the homes. The look. That look. Are you going to let him get away with that? Well, again, hearing Matt's I look back and hear Matt's kind of tagline.
I mean, once you're in a behavior like that, from my perspective, and I want to catch it beforehand, I want to create other opportunities to allow them to release it in different ways. But once they're releasing it, once they're in a hypoarousal state, there's nothing I can say or do that's going to stop that, and for some kids. And a lot of times my actions or my voice will promote it even more. Does that make sense? We'll promote and prolong it. And what we want to get kids to be able to do, guys, young people to be able to do, is regulate their own comfort within their bodies. Everyone wants to treat the thinking attached to these kids, and I get it. I do too. But in order to treat the thinking of these kids, we got to treat their bodies. We got to treat their senses and make sure they have a sensory toolkit to be able to regulate their own bodies.
So the basic point is that it didn't change anything by you letting him, draw it out. That was just kind of the best case scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was the shortest way possible. I tried many different ways to go about getting that to stop, but what I realized is we can prevent some of these by creating other alternative experiences for them. But once they do happen, I got to let that cycle run its course. I missed it. I got to let it run its course. And the more I tried to interrupt it, the more I ended up promoting or prolonging it.
He was doing the best he could in those moments, the very best he could in those moments. And that validation was huge. And for me, took weight off of my shoulders as a mom, and it gave me new hope. Yeah, first and foremost, I quit beating myself up. And my husband quit beating himself up. I mean, we still have moments, but that knowledge helped us just to lower our own stress level around his behavior. And it helped us to understand that it is normal and predictable given his traumatic early childhood experiences. It helped us kind of plan and be a little bit more strategic about when and how we would try to teach him. Because in those moments of, screaming and hitting and banging and pounding and knocking things off the table every night before dinner, learning was never going to happen. I would tell people, it's not going to do you any good. Well, you need to sit down and talk to him, and you need to put him in timeout. He's not going to sit in timeout. That's going to escalate him even more. I knew that I knew what would not work for him, but I didn't know why. So when I got the why, it increased my confidence. We were able to talk with other people in his life differently, like even his doctors and his psychiatrists, teachers. And we kind of started to learn together, and it changed our expectations. As we changed our expectations, I think the whole stress level in the family had a lot of times of relief. It didn't go away because it was still stressful, but it was better and it was easier for us. And oh my gosh, we felt better about ourselves inside as parents. I really believe that he knows that we understand him and how his brain works.